So what I want to do here, I want to remind you guys of our friction lab so that when you're writing up your lab procedures, you'll have some basic memory of what we did that day in class in order to complete this assignment. So remember, we began by taking a block here, and then we took a 1 kilogram mass and we placed it on top of the block. So remember, 1 kilogram represents a total of 1,000 grams. And of course, we had a force sensor here in order to measure our force values. And then we came over here, and then we hit the collect button, started collecting our data, and then we began pulling our block and then slowly maintain a constant velocity, then we stopped. Okay, so our data looked something like this. So I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna zoom in on this portion right here, okay? And remember, this peak right here, this maximum point, remember what that represented. That represented the very point that the block started moving. So that means all the force values measured before that point would be our static friction, and everything after that point would be our kinetic friction. So in order to measure our peak static friction, here's what we did. We just highlighted this little area here. We hit this button, then hit View Statistics, and notice the maximum here. The maximum says 13.282 newtons. So that maximum value right there represents our peak static friction for our surface, okay? And then from there, we had to measure kinetic friction. So remember, kinetic friction represents the part of the graph that is roughly at a constant velocity. So I'm gonna highlight this little region here, and I'm gonna come over here, hit this button again, hit View Statistics, and I'm gonna look at the mean, because the mean represents the average force from here to here. And again, the average force, again, that's the force when the block is roughly moving at a constant velocity. Therefore, it represents our kinetic friction, okay? So we then took those two values, so the value here and then the value here, which was 12.08 newtons. We took those two values and we recorded them in our data table, okay? And then after that, we wanted to repeat the process again. So we came over here to our block. And so we wanted to repeat the process for our second data point. In this case right here, we added a 500 gram mass to the block for a total of 1,500 grams sitting on the block itself. And then we began to repeat the process. We took this, we pulled it, maintained a constant velocity, and recorded those two data values. One value for peak static friction and the other value for kinetic friction. And then from there, we then repeated the steps for our third and final data point. But here, we then took two 200 gram masses and we placed it on the block for a total of 1,900 grams sitting on the block itself. Okay, so basically what we did, we continuously increased the object's weight until we got to 1,900 grams sitting on the block. And then we repeated the procedure where we pulled the mass, maintained a constant velocity, and recorded those two data values, one for peak static friction and the other for kinetic friction. Okay, so, and then after that, we want to take those data points and begin plotting our graph.